Hello. My name is Ryan, and for the last 8 years, I thought my marriage to Jessica was solid. We had built a life together that I was proud of. A nice house in a quiet neighborhood, plans for the future, and the kind of bond that I thought was unbreakable. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any other couple, but I never imagined that one weekend could change everything. It all started with Jessica's girls' weekend. She and her friends from college had been talking about it for weeks, planning every little detail. I encouraged her to go, telling her that it would be good for her to unwind, to have fun with her friends. I trusted her completely, and I thought it was important for her to have that time away. When she left on Friday morning, she kissed me goodbye, her smile bright, her eyes filled with excitement. "I'll miss you," she said, her voice soft, as she hugged me one last time before walking out the door. "I'll miss you too," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Have fun, okay? You deserve it." That weekend, I kept myself busy, working on a few home projects, catching up with friends, and even taking some time for myself. It felt good, knowing that we both had our own space, that we trusted each other enough to be apart and still be okay. But there was also a part of me that missed her, that counted down the hours until she would come back home. On Sunday afternoon, Jessica returned, her face flushed, her smile a little too bright. I noticed she seemed different, nervous, almost like she was trying too hard to pretend everything was fine. I brushed it off at first, figuring she was just tired from the weekend, maybe a little hungover. She hugged me when she walked through the door, but it felt forced, her arms stiff around me. "How was the weekend?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It was good," she said, her voice a little too high. "We had a lot of fun. The girls are crazy, as usual." I nodded, watching her as she moved around the living room, avoiding eye contact. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I wanted to ask her if everything was okay, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. I trusted her. I loved her. So, I pushed the doubts aside, telling myself that I was just overthinking things. That night, as we lay in bed, I reached for her, pulling her close. She tensed for a moment before relaxing, her head resting against my chest. "I missed you," I whispered, my fingers running through her hair. She didn't say anything for a moment, then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I missed you too," she said softly, her voice shaky. She leaned in, kissing me, but there was something missing, something that made my heart ache. Over the next few days, the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. Jessica was distant, distracted, and I could see her pulling away from me, even though she tried to hide it. She would smile, laugh at my jokes, but it all felt forced, like she was putting on a show. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that whatever was bothering her would pass, but the doubt was always there, gnawing at me. One night, about a week after she came back, I noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, and I was cleaning up after dinner. I glanced at the screen, my heart stopping when I saw the name that flashed across it, Jason. It wasn't a name I recognized, and the message preview made my stomach twist. "Can't stop thinking about last weekend. When can I see you again?" My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling as I picked up her phone. I knew I shouldn't look, knew that it was wrong, but the fear and suspicion that had been building inside me for days overwhelmed me. I unlocked her phone, scrolling through the messages, my eyes scanning the words that confirmed my worst fears. The messages between Jessica and Jason were flirty, intimate, filled with inside jokes, references to their time together during the girls' weekend. My stomach turned as I read the words, the playful tone, the way they talked about sneaking away from her friends to be alone. It was all there in black and white, and it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I put her phone down, my mind racing, my heart pounding. Couldn't believe it. Jessica, the woman I had trusted more than anyone in the world, had betrayed me. She had lied to me, had gone away for a weekend that was supposed to be about friends, and instead, she had been with someone else. The pain was overwhelming, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. When Jessica came out of the bathroom, her hair wet, Her face flushed. She smiled at me. "Hey," she said, her voice light, but I could see the nervousness in her eyes, the way she avoided looking directly at me. I wanted to confront her right then, to demand the truth, to make her understand how deeply she had hurt me. But instead, I just stared at her, my heart breaking, the words catching in my throat. "Hey," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She walked over to me, wrapping her arms around my waist, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I love you," she said softly, her voice shaky. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with the weight of everything I wasn't saying. "I love you too," I whispered, even though the words felt like a lie, even though I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, the silence between us filled with all the things I wanted to say but couldn't. I wanted to ask her why she had done it, why she had thrown away everything we had built together for a fling with someone I didn't even know. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. But instead, I stayed silent, my heart aching, the tears burning in my eyes. I knew that our marriage would never be the same. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, if I could ever move past what she had done. The next morning, I watched Jessica as she got ready for work, her movements slow, her eyes filled with worry. She knew something was wrong. She could see it in the way I looked at her, in the way I avoided her touch. But she didn't say anything, and neither did I. We were both pretending, both trying to act like everything was fine, even though we both knew it wasn't. As she walked out the door, she turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Ryan," she said softly, her voice cracking. I nodded, my throat tight. "I love you too," I replied, even though I didn't know if it was true anymore. When she left, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, the tears I had been holding back finally spilling over. Everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted, was gone, and I didn't know if there was any way to pick up the pieces. The rest of the week felt like a blur. Jessica and I continued our charade of normalcy, but it was clear that both of us were struggling. The tension was thick, each word between us forced, each touch hesitant. I could tell she sensed something was wrong, but she was too scared to ask, and I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted to do. One evening, I found myself sitting in the garage, staring at an old photograph of Jessica and me. It was taken years ago on a road trip to the mountains. We looked so happy, so carefree. I wanted to believe that version of us was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the lies and betrayal. But the doubt gnawed at me, the image of Jessica with Jason replaying in my mind, each replay like a knife twisting in my gut. Finally, I realized I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep sitting in silence, letting the anger and pain fester. I needed answers. I needed to know why. The next night, after dinner, I looked across the table at Jessica, my heart pounding. She was picking at her food, her eyes downcast, her expression distant. I took a deep breath, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Who's Jason?" I asked, my voice sharp, the name hanging in the air between us like a weight. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face going pale. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I clenched my jaw, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. "I saw the messages, Jessica. From Jason. He said he couldn't stop thinking about last weekend." "What happened during your girls' weekend?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, her hands shaking as she set down her fork. "Ryan," she began, her voice cracking. "It's not. Just tell me the truth," I said, my voice breaking. "Please, Jessica, don't lie to me." She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping as the tears spilled over. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake, Ryan. A stupid, terrible mistake." I felt my stomach turn, my heart pounding in my chest. What happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. It was just supposed to be a fun weekend, she said, her voice cracking. The girls and I were out at a bar, and I ran into Jason. He was someone I knew from college. We started talking, and I don't know, I was drinking, and it just got out of hand. I stared at her, my heart breaking. Did you sleep with him? I asked, the words catching in my throat. She closed her eyes, her tears falling faster now. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It only happened once, and I regretted it the moment it was over. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I felt like I couldn't breathe, the pain overwhelming. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted more than anyone in the world, had betrayed me. She had chosen someone else, even if just for one night. And now, everything we had built together felt like a lie. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why did you do it, Jessica? What did I do wrong? She shook her head, her face crumpling as she began to sob. It wasn't you, Ryan, she whispered. It was never you. I was feeling lost, like I wasn't myself anymore. And Jason, he was just there. He made me feel wanted. But it was a mistake. It meant nothing. I love you, Ryan. I always have. I looked at her, my heart aching with a mix of love and pain. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that what we had was still real. But the betrayal was too deep, the hurt too raw. I stood up, my hands trembling. I need some time, I said, my voice barely audible. I can't do this right now. Jessica looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Please, Ryan, she begged, her voice cracking. Don't leave. I love you. I want to make this right. But I couldn't. Not now. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her sobs echoing in my ears as I made my way to the garage. I sank onto the old couch, my head in my hands, the tears finally spilling over. Everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted, was gone. I stayed in the garage for a long time, the pain overwhelming. I thought about everything Jessica had said, about her reasons for cheating, about the way she had felt lost. Part of me understood it. Part of me even empathized with the feeling of being disconnected, of wanting something more. But another part of me, the part that still ached from the betrayal, wasn't sure if understanding was enough to forgive her. Eventually, I went back inside, the house dark and quiet. Jessica was sitting on the couch, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes filled with hope and fear. I stood there for a moment, my heart heavy. Then I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what the future holds for us, I said. I don't know if I can forgive you, or if we can ever be what we used to be. But I do know that I love you, and I'm willing to try if you are. Jessica's face crumpled, her tears spilling over as she nodded. I am, she whispered. I want to fix this, Ryan. I want us to be okay again. I nodded, the tears burning in my eyes. It's not going to be easy, I said, and it's going to take time, but I'm willing to try. She stood up, taking a hesitant step toward me. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me a chance. I took a deep breath, my heart aching. We're not okay, I said softly. But maybe, just maybe, we can find our way back. Jessica nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I promise. We stood there, the silence between us filled with both hope and uncertainty. It wasn't a solution, and it wasn't a promise that everything would be okay. But it was a start, a step toward trying to rebuild what had been broken. The days after our conversation were some of the hardest I've ever faced. Jessica and I were walking a tightrope, trying to find a way to move forward without falling apart. The house felt different, emptier, like there was a rift between us that neither of us knew how to cross. We were trying, though, in our own ways to begin again. Jessica made it a point to be transparent with me. She deleted Jason's number, blocked him on every social media platform, and even changed her phone number to make sure there were no more lingering connections. She wanted me to know that she was committed to us, that she was willing to do whatever it took to regain my trust. She also suggested that we go to couples therapy, something I never thought we would need, but I knew it was worth a shot. The first session was uncomfortable, to say the least. Dr. Harper was calm and professional, her voice soothing as she asked us to introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. Jessica spoke first, her voice cracking as she talked about her mistake, about the hurt she had caused. I sat there, listening to her, my chest tight, the words she spoke echoing in my mind. When it was my turn, I felt the anger bubbling up, the pain that I had been trying to push down rising to the surface. "I just don't understand why," I said, my voice breaking. "I thought we were happy. I thought we had a good life. And then, suddenly, everything I believed in was gone. How do you come back from that?" Dr. Harper nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's okay to feel that way, Ryan," she said softly. "You've experienced a profound betrayal, and it's natural to feel lost and hurt. But what we need to focus on now is whether you both want to rebuild. Whether you're both willing to do the hard work it will take to heal." Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I want to," she whispered. "I want to make things right. I know I hurt you, Ryan, and I know I can't take it back. But I want to fight for us." I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging with tears. "I want to try," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely, but I want to try. I don't want to just throw away everything we've built together." Dr. Harper nodded, her expression gentle. "That's a good start," she said. "Rebuilding trust is a long process, and it won't happen overnight. But if you're both committed to it, there's hope." The session left me feeling raw, exposed, but also strangely hopeful. It felt like, for the first time, we were addressing the pain head-on, instead of just pretending that everything was fine. We were talking about it, confronting it, and that, in itself, felt like a step forward. When we got home, Jessica reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. "Thank you for coming with me," she said softly. "I know it's hard, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm so grateful that you're willing to try." I nodded, my heart aching. "I just want to understand," I said. "I want to understand why you did it, why you felt like you needed something else." Jessica took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know if I can ever fully explain it," she said, her voice cracking. "I was feeling lost, like I wasn't myself anymore. I felt like I had lost my identity, like I was just going through the motions. And Jason, he made me feel noticed, made me feel alive. But it was wrong, and I hate myself for it. I wish I could take it all back." I looked at her, my heart heavy. "I wish you could too," I said softly. "But we can't change the past. All we can do is try to move forward." The following weeks were filled with small attempts to rebuild. We went to therapy twice a week, working through our emotions, our fears, our hopes. We started spending more time together, going for walks, cooking dinner, even watching our favorite shows again. It was awkward at times. There was still a distance between us, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. But we were trying, and that was more than I had thought possible. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. "Do you think we'll ever really be okay again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, my heart swelling with a mix of love and pain. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we're making progress. It's not perfect, and it's not going to be easy, but I think we're on the right path." She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I want us to be better," she said softly. "I want us to be stronger than we were before. I know I messed up, but I want to learn from it. I want to be the partner you deserve." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I want that too," I said quietly. "I want to move forward, to build something new with you." She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." The next day, we decided to go out for dinner. A small but significant step. It felt like a date, like we were trying to reconnect with the parts of ourselves that had been lost in the betrayal. We went to a small restaurant we used to frequent, a place that held good memories for both of us. As we sat across from each other, I could see the effort Jessica was making. Her eyes were filled with hope, her smile genuine. We talked about our past, about the good times we had shared, about the dreams we had once had for our future. It was bittersweet, but it also reminded me of why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. Despite everything, despite the hurt and betrayal, there was still love there, still a connection that hadn't been completely broken. By the end of the meal, I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe we could get through this. Maybe we could find a way to move forward, to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were no guarantees. But as we left the restaurant, Jessica slipped her hand into mine, and I realized that I wanted to keep trying. That night, as we lay in bed, Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, my heart aching. "I think I'm working on it," I said softly. "It's going to take time, but I want to get there. I want to forgive you, for both of us." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "I love you, Ryan," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you too," I replied, my voice cracking. "And I want to keep fighting for us, as long as you do." We weren't okay, not yet. There were still wounds that needed to heal, still scars that would always be there. But we were trying. We were fighting for each other, for the love we still had, even if it was different now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. As the weeks turned into months, Jessica and I found ourselves settling into a new normal. It wasn't the life we had before, and I knew that it never would be. The trust we had once shared was fragile, like a thin sheet of glass that could crack with the slightest pressure. But we were both committed to rebuilding, and that gave me hope. Jessica was doing everything she could to show me that she was in this for the long haul. She was open with me about her day, her feelings, her fears. She went out of her way to make sure I knew where she was, who she was with, and she never hesitated to hand me her phone if I asked to see it. She wanted to prove that she had nothing to hide, that she was willing to be vulnerable if it meant winning back my trust. There were still difficult days when the pain of her betrayal resurfaced, when I found myself questioning if I was doing the right thing by staying. Sometimes, it would be something small that would set me off. A romantic scene in a movie, a song on the radio, a casual mention of her girls' weekend. Those moments would bring the hurt rushing back, and I would find myself pulling away from her, retreating into myself. But each time, Jessica was patient. She didn't push me, didn't demand that I get over it. Instead, she would sit with me, hold my hand, and remind me that she was here, that she loved me, and that she wasn't going anywhere. One Saturday morning, Jessica suggested that we do something spontaneous, something fun, just the two of us. "What if we took a drive to the countryside?" she asked, her eyes filled with excitement. "We could just get in the car, drive, and see where we end up. No plan, no destination, just us." I looked at her, the hope in her eyes tugging at my heart. It had been a long time since we had done something like that, since we had allowed ourselves to just be, without the weight of everything hanging over us. "Okay," I said, giving her a small smile. "Let's do it." We packed a bag, grabbed some snacks, and set off. As we drove, the sun shining brightly, the windows down, there was a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in a long time. We talked, laughed, and sang along to the radio, and for a few hours it felt like we were just Ryan and Jessica again. Two people in love without the burden of betrayal weighing us down. We ended up at a small, quaint town in the countryside, the kind of place that felt like it had been frozen in time. There was a farmer's market in the town square, and we wandered through the stalls buying fresh fruit, homemade jams, and flowers. Jessica smiled at me, her eyes shining, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine sense of happiness. It was as if, for that brief moment, the cracks in our relationship had been smoothed over, and I could see the life we could still have if we kept fighting for it. After the market, we found a small cafe and sat down for lunch. As we ate, Jessica reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It's been perfect." I looked at her, my heart swelling with a mix of love and pain. "Thank you for suggesting it," I replied. "I think we needed this." She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I know it's not easy," she whispered. "I know I've hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But I promise you, Ryan, I'm doing everything I can to be the woman you deserve." I squeezed her hand, my throat tightening. "And I see that," I said. "I see how hard you're trying, and I appreciate it. It's going to take time, but I want to get there. I want to be okay again." Jessica smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," I replied, my voice cracking. We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the town, and as we made our way back home, there was a sense of peace between us. A fragile peace, but a peace nonetheless. It wasn't perfect, and I knew that we still had a long way to go. But it was something. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking back to our day in the countryside, to the way Jessica had smiled, the way she had looked at me with such love and hope. It reminded me of the early days of our relationship, of the times when everything had felt simple, easy. I wanted to get back to that place, even if it meant starting over, even if it meant letting go of the past. One night, as we sat on the couch, Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Ryan," she began, her voice trembling. "I've been thinking. I know it might be too soon, but what if we renewed our vows?" I looked at her, taken aback. "Renew our vows?" I repeated, my heart pounding. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I know it might sound silly, but I want to make a new commitment to you. I want to show you that I'm in this for the long haul, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I want to promise you, all over again, that I'm yours, and that I'll never betray you again." Her words hit me like a wave, and I felt the tears welling up in my eyes. It wasn't something I had expected, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Maybe this was what we needed. A way to leave the past behind, to make new promises, to start over. "I think I'd like that," I said softly, my voice cracking. "I think it could be good for us." Jessica's face lit up, her tears spilling over as she nodded. "Really?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, my heart aching. "I think it's a good idea. I want to start over with you, Jessica. I want to rebuild." She threw her arms around me, her body trembling as she cried. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a chance." I held her close, my own tears falling, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on us. It wasn't a magical fix. It wouldn't erase what had happened or make the pain go away. But it was a step toward healing, toward building something new. The following weeks were filled with planning, with moments of hope and excitement. We decided to keep the vow renewal small, just the two of us at the park where we had first met. It felt right, like a full circle, a way to honor the love we had shared from the beginning while also making new promises for the future. The day of the vow renewal arrived, and as we stood there, just the two of us, the sun shining down, I looked at Jessica, my heart swelling with love and hope. She looked beautiful, her eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "Ryan," she began, her voice shaky, "I know I've hurt you, and I know that I can never take back what I did, but I want you to know that I love you, more than anything. I promise to be the partner you deserve, to be honest, faithful, and committed to you. I promise to fight for us, every single day, for the rest of my life." The tears spilled over, and I nodded, my heart aching. "Jessica," I said softly, my voice breaking, "I love you. I promise to let go of the past, to move forward with you, to rebuild what we lost. I promise to trust you, to be vulnerable with you, and to always choose you, no matter how hard it gets." She smiled, her tears falling, and she leaned in, her lips meeting mine in a gentle, tender kiss. It wasn't about passion. It was about connection, about hope, about choosing each other despite everything. As we stood there, holding each other, the past still lingering but no longer defining us, I realized that this was what love was. Choosing each other, every day, even when it was hard, even when it wasn't perfect. It was about forgiveness, about growth, and about being willing to face the challenges together. And as I held Jessica close, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. One step at a time, one day at a time. After our vow renewal, there was a sense of renewed commitment between Jessica and me. A feeling that, despite everything, we were stronger now. It wasn't a perfect transformation. There were still moments of uncertainty and times when the scars of her betrayal resurfaced. But there was also a new foundation being built, brick by brick, as we made small decisions every day to trust each other again. One of the hardest parts for me was learning how to fully open up to Jessica again. After her affair, I had become guarded, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of getting hurt again. I had built a wall between us to protect myself, and tearing it down was a slow, deliberate process. But I knew that if we were going to make this work, I had to let her back in. I had to be willing to take the risk, to let her see my fears, my insecurities, and my love for her without holding anything back. Jessica was patient. She never pushed me, never demanded that I give her more than I was ready to. She understood that I needed time, and she was willing to wait. She went out of her way to show me, in small ways, that she was committed to us. She would leave notes for me on the bathroom mirror. Small, handwritten reminders that she loved me, that she was thinking of me. She would text me throughout the day just to check in, to let me know that she cared. It was those little gestures that helped to rebuild the trust between us, that showed me that she was sincere in her desire to make things right. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, sharing a bottle of wine. It was one of those quiet, peaceful nights where it felt like the world had slowed down, and it was just the two of us. Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of love and uncertainty. "Ryan," she said softly, "I've been thinking about everything, and I just want you to know that if you ever need me to answer any questions, if there's anything that's still weighing on you, I'm here. I'll be completely honest with you." I took a deep breath, her words hanging in the air between us. There were still questions I had, questions that I had been too afraid to ask, that I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. But I knew that if we were going to move forward, if we were really going to rebuild, I needed to face the past head-on. "Why did you choose Jason?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What was it about him that made you do what you did?" Jessica looked down, her eyes filling with tears. She was quiet for a moment, then she spoke, her voice trembling. "It wasn't about him, Ryan," she said softly. "It was about me. I was feeling lost, disconnected, like I wasn't enough. Jason was just there. He was someone who paid attention to me when I felt invisible. But it was never real. It was never what I wanted. What I wanted was you. But I was too scared to admit that I needed help, that I was struggling." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, the pain that had been with me since the day I found out. But I also felt something else, understanding. I could see, in her eyes, the regret that she carried with her every day, the pain that she felt for what she had done. And I realized that, as much as I had been hurt, she had also been struggling. She had been lost, and she had made a terrible mistake. But she was here now, trying to make things right, trying to be the woman I had fallen in love with. "I wish you had come to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wish you had talked to me instead of turning to him." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wish that too," she whispered. "Every day. I wish I could go back and make a different choice. But I can't. All I can do now is try to be better, to be the partner you deserve." I looked at her, my heart aching. "And I see that," I said softly. "I see how hard you're trying, and I appreciate it. It's not easy, but I want to forgive you. I want to move forward with you." Jessica smiled, her tears glistening in the dim light. She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." As we sat there, holding each other, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it didn't make the pain go away, but it was a step. a step toward letting go of the past, toward building something new together. In the following weeks, Jessica and I began to rebuild our routines, but with a renewed sense of purpose. We made time for each other, making sure that we were truly connecting. We started having weekly date nights, something we hadn't done in years. They weren't always elaborate. Sometimes it was just a movie at home or a walk in the park. But it was about being present, about making each other a priority. One Saturday, Jessica surprised me with tickets to a local cooking class. "I know you've always wanted to try this," she said, her smile bright, her eyes filled with hope. "And I thought it could be fun for us to do something new together." I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. She had remembered. I had mentioned wanting to take a cooking class years ago, but life had gotten in the way, and we had never made the time. Now, here she was, trying to make it happen, trying to create new memories with me. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "I'd love to go." The class was small, just a handful of couples gathered around a long counter, learning how to make pasta from scratch. It was messy, chaotic, and perfect. We laughed as we fumbled with the dough, as flour covered our hands, our clothes, even our faces. It was one of those moments where everything else faded away, and it was just us, two people in love trying to find their way back to each other. As the class ended, and we sat down to eat the pasta we had made, Jessica looked at me, her eyes shining. "This was amazing," she said softly. I feel like we're really making progress." I nodded, my heart full. "We are," I said. "We're not perfect, but we're trying. And that's all that matters." She smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "I love you, Ryan," she whispered. "I love you too," I replied, my voice cracking. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't the kind of love story where everything magically fell into place, where all the pain disappeared. But it was real. It was us, choosing each other, every day, despite the scars, despite the past. One night, as we lay in bed, Jessica turned to me, her voice soft. "Do you think we'll ever be able to fully let go of what happened?" she asked, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. "I think we're already doing it," I said quietly. "It's not about forgetting. It's about moving forward, about making new memories that outweigh the bad ones. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard." She smiled, her tears glistening in the moonlight. "I want that," she whispered. "I want to keep choosing you, every day, for the rest of my life." I reached for her hand, my fingers intertwining with hers. "And I'll keep choosing you," I said softly, "one day at a time." As we lay there, holding each other, I realized that we had come a long way since the day I had found out about her affair. We had faced the darkest parts of ourselves, and we had chosen to stay to rebuild. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was enough. It was love in its rawest, truest form. And as I held Jessica close, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, brick by brick, day by day, rebuilding the trust, the love, and the life we wanted to share. With each passing day, Jessica and I continued to rebuild. Life began to feel a little more normal, a little more comfortable. We were learning to laugh together again, to find joy in the small things, to create moments that reminded us of why we fell in love in the first place. But even with all the progress we made, there was still an undercurrent of fragility, a reminder that trust, once broken, was difficult to fully restore. One day, Jessica told me that her friends wanted to plan another weekend getaway, another girls' weekend. As soon as she brought it up, I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. It was that same kind of weekend months ago that had torn our marriage apart. Now, even though I knew she was committed to making things right, the idea of her going away again, of being out of my sight for days, filled me with fear. Jessica must have seen the hesitation in my eyes, because she quickly added, "You can come too if you want. I don't want to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, Ryan. I want us to feel good about this." I took a deep breath, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to say no, that I wasn't ready, that I wasn't sure I would ever be ready for her to go away without me again. But another part of me knew that this was a test, that it was a chance for me to let go of the past, to take a step toward truly trusting her again. "No, you should go," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "You deserve to have time with your friends. I don't want to hold you back because of my fears." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "I don't want to do anything that will hurt you, Ryan." I nodded, my heart heavy. "I'm sure," I said. "It's not going to be easy, but I want to trust you. I want us to keep moving forward." Jessica smiled, her tears spilling over. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself. I promise you, I'll do everything I can to show you that you can trust me." The day she left for the weekend, I tried my best to stay calm, to remind myself that this was different, that Jessica had changed, that she was committed to being honest with me. She hugged me tightly before she left, her eyes filled with love. "I'll call you every night," she promised. "I want you to know that I'm thinking of you." I nodded, my throat tight. "Just be safe, okay?" I said softly. She smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I will. I love you, Ryan." "I love you too," I replied, my voice cracking. As she drove away, I felt the anxiety settle in my chest, the fear that something might go wrong, that I might lose her all over again. I tried to distract myself, watched TV, worked on a home project, called Mark to catch up. But the worry was always there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. That night, true to her word, Jessica called. Hearing her voice helped to calm my fears, even if just a little. She sounded happy, relaxed, and she talked about how much fun she was having with her friends. "We're just sitting around the fire right now," she said, her voice warm. "It's nice to be out here, but I miss you. I wish you were here." "I miss you too," I said softly. "But I'm glad you're having a good time." We talked for a while, and by the time we hung up, I felt a sense of relief. Maybe this was the right step. Maybe letting her go, letting her have her space was exactly what we needed to fully heal. The second night, she called again, just as she said she would. This time, I could hear the laughter of her friends in the background, and she sounded genuinely happy. "We went hiking today," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "You would have loved it, Ryan. The view was incredible. I took a bunch of pictures to show you when I get back." I smiled, the knot of anxiety in my chest beginning to loosen. "I can't wait to see them," I said. "I'm glad you're having fun." The next day, I found myself feeling more at ease. I realized that I trusted Jessica, that the fear that had once overwhelmed me was starting to fade. It wasn't completely gone, and it probably never would be, but I was learning to let go, to believe in her love for me again. And that was a step toward healing. When she returned home on Sunday, I could see the exhaustion on her face, but there was also a sense of peace. She hugged me tightly, her arms wrapping around my neck as she held me close. "I missed you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I missed you too," I replied, my heart swelling with love. I could feel the tears threatening to spill over, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on me. But there was also a sense of hope that we were truly on the path to healing. That night, as we sat on the couch, Jessica showed me the pictures she had taken during the trip. I could see the joy in her eyes, the genuine happiness that she had found, and it made my heart ache with both love and relief. She had gone away, had spent time with her friends, and she had come back to me. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory, a sign that we could keep moving forward, that we could keep building something new. "Thank you for trusting me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I know it wasn't easy, and I know it probably brought back a lot of pain. But it means the world to me that you gave me this chance." I looked at her, my heart aching. "You've earned it," I said. "You've shown me every day that you're committed to us. I still have fears, and I still have doubts sometimes. But I love you, Jessica, and I want to keep fighting for us." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And I'll keep fighting for us too," she whispered. "Every single day." In the days that followed, I noticed a change in both of us. There was a sense of lightness, a sense that the weight we had been carrying for so long was beginning to lift. We were learning to trust each other again, to be vulnerable, to let go of the fear that had held us back. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the past would creep in, when the pain would resurface, but those moments were becoming less frequent. And each time they did, we faced them together. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with hope. "Do you think we're going to be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. "I think we're already getting there," I said softly. "We've been through hell, but we're still here. We're still choosing each other, every day. And that's enough for me." She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "I love you, Ryan," she whispered, "and I'll keep choosing you, for the rest of my life." "I love you too," I replied, my voice cracking. As we sat there, the sun dipping below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, I realized that the journey we were on wasn't about finding a perfect ending. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that everything was okay. It was about facing the challenges together, about choosing each other, even when it was hard, even when it wasn't perfect. We had been broken, but we were also stronger now. More honest, more open, more willing to fight for the love we still shared. And as I held Jessica close, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. One day at a time, one step at a time. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was our story, and it was one worth fighting for. As the months went by, I felt the pieces of my heart slowly start to come back together. Jessica and I were finding a rhythm again, learning to live as partners instead of just two people trying to navigate their pain. There was still a scar from her betrayal, a scar that would always be there, but it didn't sting as much anymore. It had become part of who we were, a reminder of what we had been through and how we had chosen to fight for each other despite everything. One evening, we decided to have dinner at a small Italian restaurant we used to frequent in the early days of our marriage. It had been our favorite place, a cozy little spot with candlelit tables and soft music in the background. It had been years since we last went, and as we sat down at our table, I could see Jessica's eyes shining with nostalgia. "I can't believe it's been so long since we were here," she said softly, her fingers brushing against mine on the table. "I remember our first date here. You were so nervous you knocked over your water glass." I laughed, the memory coming back to me vividly. "Yeah, and you just laughed it off like it was no big deal," I said. "I think that's when I knew you were different, when I knew you were the one." Jessica smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I still remember the way you looked at me that night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "like I was the only person in the world. I missed that look." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words hanging between us. "I know," I said softly. "I miss it too, but I think we're getting there. I think we're finding our way back to that place." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I hope so," she whispered. "I love you so much, Ryan. I want us to be better than we were before." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "We will be," I said. "It's not going to be easy, but we've already come so far. And I love you too, more than anything." Dinner that night felt like a return to who we used to be, a glimpse of the love we had shared before everything had fallen apart. We laughed, talked, and shared stories, and for a few hours it felt like we were two people falling in love all over again. It was a reminder of why we were fighting for each other, of what we still had that was worth saving. After dinner, we walked through the park near the restaurant, the air cool and crisp, the stars twinkling above us. Jessica slipped her arm around my waist, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "It was perfect." I looked down at her, my heart swelling with love. "Thank you for being here," I said, "for fighting for us. I know it hasn't been easy, but I'm so glad we're still standing." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I am too," she whispered. As we walked, I realized that while our relationship was different now, it wasn't necessarily worse. We had faced the worst of each other, had seen the pain and the hurt, and had chosen to stay. And that, in itself, was something beautiful. It was a deeper love, a love that had been tested and had come out stronger on the other side. One afternoon, Jessica surprised me with a picnic. She had packed a basket with my favorite foods and brought a blanket, and we drove out to a nearby lake. As we sat by the water, the sun shining down on us, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with hope. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice soft. "About what comes next for us?" I nodded, my heart heavy but hopeful. "I do," I said. "I think about us building a life together, maybe getting a new house, starting a family. I think about all the things we still have ahead of us, all the things we can still create together." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want us to keep moving forward, to keep building something beautiful." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We will," I said softly. "One day at a time." She leaned in, her lips brushing against mine in a gentle kiss, and I closed my eyes, the warmth of her love filling me. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about moving forward, about choosing each other despite everything we had been through. The following weeks were filled with more small moments like that. Moments that reminded us why we were fighting, moments that helped to rebuild the trust between us. We continued going to therapy, continued talking about our fears, our hopes, our dreams. And slowly, the walls that I had built around my heart began to come down. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. "Ryan, I know I've said this a million times, but I need you to know how deeply I regret everything that happened," she said, her voice cracking. "I hate that I hurt you, and I hate that I put us through so much pain, but I want you to know that I'm committed to us, to being the partner you deserve." I looked at her, my heart aching. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the remorse that she carried with her every day. And for the first time, I realized that I believed her completely. I believed in her love, in her commitment to making things right. "I know, Jessica," I said softly, my voice breaking, "and I forgive you. I know it's not perfect, and I know there will still be hard days, but I love you, and I want to move forward with you." She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, wrapping her arms around me. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be better." I held her close, my own tears falling, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on us. It wasn't a perfect ending, and it wasn't a guarantee that everything would be okay. But it was a promise that we were both willing to fight for each other, to fight for the love we still shared. And as we sat there, holding each other, the sun setting behind the trees, I realized that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about choosing each other, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. It was about forgiveness, about growth, about being willing to face the challenges together. Jessica and I had been broken, but we were also stronger now. We were more honest, more open, more willing to fight for each other. And as I held her close, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. One day at a time, one step at a time. We had found our way back to each other, and that was enough. It wasn't the fairy tale we had once imagined, but it was real, it was raw, and it was ours. Months after Jessica and I began our journey of rebuilding, life had started to feel normal again. It wasn't the same kind of normal we once had. It was something different, something more meaningful. There was a depth to our relationship now, a closeness that came from having faced our darkest moments and deciding that, despite the pain, we still wanted each other. We had both changed in many ways. Jessica had become more open, more willing to be vulnerable, to share her fears and insecurities. And I had learned to let go of the walls I had built around myself. I had learned to trust again, not just Jessica but myself, my ability to love, to forgive, to choose hope over fear. One day, as we were sitting on the porch, enjoying the cool autumn breeze, Jessica looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I've been thinking." I know we've been through a lot, and I know things will never be perfect. But I want us to start thinking about the future again. I want us to dream again. I looked at her, my heart swelling with emotion. What kind of future are you thinking about? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, her eyes shining with tears. I want us to start a family, she said, her voice cracking. I want to build a life with you, to have something that's ours, something that represents the love we fought so hard for. Her words took me by surprise, but as I thought about it, I realized that I wanted the same thing. I wanted to build a future with Jessica, to have something that symbolized all the love and effort we had put into making our relationship work. The idea of starting a family, of having a child, filled me with both fear and hope. It was a big step, a leap of faith, but I knew that if I was going to take that leap with anyone, it was Jessica. I want that too, I said softly, my voice cracking. I want to build a life with you, to start a family. I know it won't be easy, but I think we're ready. I think we're finally in a place where we can start dreaming again. Jessica's face lit up, her tears spilling over as she leaned in, wrapping her arms around me. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right, for giving us a chance to build something beautiful. I held her close, my own tears falling, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on us. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that everything was perfect. It was about building something new, something better, something that represented all the love, pain, and hope that we had shared. The following weeks were filled with excitement and a renewed sense of purpose. We began talking about our future, about what we wanted for our family. We made plans, took long walks through the neighborhood, and imagined what it would be like to have children running around the yard. There was a sense of hope between us, a feeling that, despite everything, we were finally moving forward. One afternoon, as we walked through the park, Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. Ryan, she said softly, do you think we're really ready for this? Do you think we're strong enough to be parents? I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. I think we are, I said, my voice filled with determination. We've been through hell and we've come out on the other side. We're stronger now, more honest, more open. And I think that's exactly what we need to be good parents. She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. I want to be the best partner I can be for you, and I want us to be the best parents we can be, she whispered. I know we'll make mistakes, but I also know that we'll love each other, and that's what matters most. I couldn't agree more, I said softly, my heart aching with both hope and love. As we stood there, holding each other, the sun setting behind us, I realized that we had come a long way since the day I had found out about her affair. We had faced our fears, our pain, our darkest moments, and we had chosen to fight for each other, to stay, to rebuild. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments when I doubted whether we could make it, moments when I wanted to walk away. But each time we had chosen each other, and that made all the difference. In the months that followed, Jessica and I began the process of trying to start a family. It wasn't without its challenges, and there were moments when the past would resurface, when old fears would come rushing back. But each time we faced them together, and that made all the difference. We were no longer running from the pain, we were confronting it, together. One evening, as we sat in the nursery we had started preparing, Jessica turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. Ryan, she said softly, I know I've said this before, but I need you to know how grateful I am. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But you stayed. You chose to fight for us, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for that. I looked at her, my heart aching with both love and pain. I stayed because I love you, I said softly, my voice cracking. I stayed because I believe in us, in what we can be. And I'm so glad I did. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else with anyone else. She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine in a gentle, tender kiss. It wasn't about passion. It was about love, about connection, about choosing each other despite everything we had been through. As we sat there, holding each other, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on us, I realized that this was what love was. Choosing each other, every day, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. It was about forgiveness, about growth, about being willing to face the challenges together. Jessica and I had been through hell, but we had come out on the other side stronger, more honest, more willing to fight for the love we still shared. And as I held her close, I knew that whatever the future held, whatever challenges, whatever joys, whatever heartaches, we would face it together. It wasn't the fairy tale we had once imagined, but it was real, it was raw, and it was ours. And as I looked at Jessica, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the nursery lamp, I knew that this was the life I wanted, the life we had fought for, the life we had built together, one day at a time. We had been broken, but we had also been remade, stronger, more resilient, more committed to each other. And as we prepared for this next chapter, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, with love, hope, and an unwavering commitment to each other. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. Choosing each other, every day, no matter what. Bye-bye.